I'm Laurance Doyle, and I'm a principal investigator at the SETI Institute, and I'm also director of the Quantum Astrophysics Group. We have all these communication systems on Earth. All animals communicate, and if we're going to expect an extraterrestrial signal that's non-human, we should practice on non-human communication systems. So what I do is I head up a group that's applying information theory to humpback whales, because they have kind of a global communication system already. NASA started an astrobiology program, and they said, we're going to use Antarctica as a proxy for Mars. So we go to Antarctica and study life under the ice, and we'll say that could exist on Jupiter's moon Europa, or it could exist on Mars. And so they use Antarctica as a proxy for Mars. So I thought, why aren't we using other communication systems on Earth that are non-human, like humpback whales, as a proxy for an extraterrestrial signal? And kind of a natural extrapolation of the astrobiology program is using studying non-human communication systems. And of course, humpback whales are the most gregarious marine mammals we know of, and they do transmit over large distances. And they use tools. They build nets of bubbles to catch herring. And in all so many ways, they are a perfect candidate to try out detection of a non-terrestrial, namely aquatic signal. Well, we picked humpback whales because they have a great number of, you might say, phonemes. And that is that the sounds an average human language makes, maybe 50 or so, but humpbacks must have hundreds. And they not only sound like all sorts of other animals, but they also can imitate human tempo and human frequency range. And we've heard them doing that. So humpback whales are a natural candidate. You might say blue whales. A blue whale could communicate with any other blue whale years ago from pole to pole. So if it wasn't for the 5 hertz frequency of supertankers interfering with their 5 hertz communication, blue whales could be talking around the globe. Any blue whale could talk with any other blue whale. But so far, their signals aren't as interesting and challenging as humpback whales. So of all the critters to pick, you want to pick something that is some species that's intelligent, but also puts most of their communication into their vocalizations. Chimpanzees have gestures and facials, and so it complicates things. But humpback whales put almost all their communication into their signals, so we have the whole communication system. So that was another reason for choosing humpback whales. And also, they're very social. In Hawaii, they sing, and they come to Southeast Alaska, and they argue. And they feed, and they have conversations. And it doesn't sound like singing. See, what's interesting about humpback whales is we've taken they jump up in the air and smack the water, and you can get mitochondrial DNA out of the skin that they leave when they do that. And we tested the mitochondrial DNA, and humpback whales that are doing bubble netting together, making nets of bubbles to catch herring, are not related. They're not families. They build long-lasting relationships based on ability. Well, humans are the only other species we know that do that. So maybe they're socially closer to us than any other species, because they do have long-lasting relationships based on ability. For example, you can look at a linguistic rule, a simple one called Ziff's law. His name, George Zipf, was a linguist, and we used George Ziff's law to take a first look at humpback whale and bottlenose dolphins and other animals. And the reason we can do that is George Zipf did a plot, and it's a logarithmic plot, but that doesn't matter. He plotted the frequency of occurrence of the letter E, then T, then A, on down to the letter Q. And it gave a 45-degree -1 slope. Well, that's interesting. What if you take a book written in Chinese, -1? What if you take a conversation in Russian, -1? Turned out human languages obey this distribution of the words or the phonemes or the letters. So we decided to plot bottlenose dolphins, -1. Well, linguists were thinking Zipf's law is only obeyed by human languages, and that's what distinguishes human languages from non-humans. But we got a -1 for bottlenose dolphins, and we've gotten it for several other species. We've not gotten it for ground squirrels, for example. So in other words, it's an indicator of a more complex language. It's not a sufficient, but it is a necessary condition. So that's an example of a very little intelligence, very, I would say, primitive intelligence filter. You get an extraterrestrial signal, it obeys Zipf's law, you start looking. And what do you look for? You look for dependencies between signals. For example, say I'm thinking of a letter that's the second letter in a word. You may guess E, you may guess A, but what if I say the first letter is a T? You may say the next letter could be an H. Well, you wouldn't have picked H ordinarily, but you're using the dependence of H on the preceding letter, which is a T. So you're using conditional probabilities between signals to see what is the two-letter structure. Well, you can look for structure in different animals. And while not translating what they're saying yet, we can nevertheless discover the structural rules within that communication system. And we found these structural rules within humpback. Well, what is the meaning of the messaging sent to whales to each other? Well, that's a good question. I think we have to do the information theory analysis to get the complexity of the communication system before we can go after meaning. But we know this last summer, a postdoc, Michelle, actually recorded, she had an idea that a thrup call meant a contact call. And she got 100% response from 2 thrup calls that we played, and the humpbacks would come and greet us. So that's an example of beginning to translate, but that's only because hi is very simple and correlated with actions. If you take a bee dance language, they dance in polar coordinates, and they're talking about flowers and the sun, but it's inside the hive. So obviously they're talking about something that isn't present, and that's symbolic communication. We expect humpback whales and dolphins and complex communication systems to not be directly related to action. So you can't just watch them and go, they made a thrup call and they breathe out or something. It's not that simple, but we're beginning to get what the meaning is. So we need a lot more data. We have a hydrophone array now that we deployed in the field so we can time the vocalizations from different humpbacks and identify who's moving toward who and vocalizing what. So that'll really help us. And we have about 4 or 5 more years funding to see this through and apply it to SETI filters.